Some truths are buried deep within families, hidden behind the most familiar smiles. The ones we share meals with, the ones who tuck us in at night, the ones whose presence we trust without question. What if they're the very ones slowly tightening the noose around us? What if betrayal comes not from an enemy, but from the same hands that once held yours with affection? It all begins with the mundane, the small, unnoticed things. A misplaced bottle. A glass of soda that tastes slightly off. A headache that seems to come out of nowhere. A trip to the hospital for exhaustion. Another for unexplained dizziness. Doctors scratch their heads, running tests that find no clear answers. And with each passing day, the symptoms worsen. But the puzzle isn't complete yet, just scattered pieces that hint at something more beneath the surface. This is not just a story about betrayal, it's about something far worse. What if the person you trust the most is not just keeping secrets, but quietly plotting your downfall? And by the time you begin to notice the cracks, it's already too late. What if love isn't love at all, but merely a mask for intentions that would chill you to your core? At the center of this twisted story is William Hudson, a 60-year-old man from Alabama. On the surface, Hudson seemed like a typical retiree, quiet, unassuming, and blending seamlessly into his suburban surroundings. He had spent most of his life working blue-collar jobs, maintaining a low profile. But beneath his outwardly ordinary appearance lay a man driven by desires that would eventually push him to shatter the very foundation of his family. William's marriage to his wife was one that had seen better days. They met later in life, and at first, the relationship appeared to provide companionship for both of them. However, as the years went by, tensions began to surface. Layla Hudson, his wife, noticed William becoming emotionally distant, and their marriage, once hopeful, began to erode. Arguments about finances, health issues, and their growing emotional disconnect became part of their daily routine. But while these cracks in their marriage seemed like the typical struggles of aging couples, William had already begun to turn his attention towards someone much younger, someone under their very William. Layla Hudson, in her early 60s, was a woman devoted to her family. She had children from a previous relationship, and despite the challenges of marriage, she tried to keep the family together. To those who knew her, Layla was known as kind-hearted, a woman who put her children first and tried to create a sense of normalcy despite the tensions in her marriage. But as her relationship with William deteriorated, she found herself emotionally exhausted. Arguments grew more frequent and the distance between them widened. Layla was no stranger to sacrifice. She had invested herself fully in her role as a mother, always putting her children's needs above her own. She believed in second chances and hoped that the rough patches in her marriage with William would pass. But while she worked to salvage what was left of their relationship, William was silently orchestrating her betrayal, building a plan that would not only take her place in the family, but strip away the life she had fought so hard to maintain. The heart of this story lies in the illicit relationship between William Hudson and his stepdaughter, a 22-year-old woman who had been living with her mother and stepfather for years. From the outside, she was simply a young woman trying to find her way in life. But inside the walls of their home, the boundaries between stepfather and stepdaughter began to blur. What should have remained a familial bond slowly evolved into something far more inappropriate and ultimately dangerous. William's manipulation didn't happen overnight. It began quietly, with small gestures of kindness and emotional support, all designed to create a sense of dependency. The stepdaughter, struggling with her own challenges, found herself leaning on William for comfort. As their relationship deepened, it was no longer just a matter of seeking comfort. It became an emotional and physical. The question that remains is this: was the stepdaughter a victim of William's grooming, or was she fully complicit in the betrayal? As time went on, their relationship took on a new dimension, one that made Layla an obstacle in their path. Conversations about what could be without Layla began to take shape. The idea of a life together, unhindered by the complications of Hudson's marriage, became more than a fantasy. It became a plan, and the only way to remove Layla from the picture, in Hudson's mind, was to act decisively. From the outside, the Hudson household seemed ordinary. Nothing about it would have drawn suspicion. But the cracks beneath the surface were widening, and the dynamics inside were far from what they seemed. William Hudson's growing obsession with his stepdaughter was turning the family home into a place of betrayal and manipulation. While Layla fought to hold her marriage together, William was actively working to destroy it. And his stepdaughter, whether knowingly or through manipulation, was being pulled deeper into a relationship that defied every boundary. These tensions were not marked by loud arguments or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they played out quietly in stolen glances, whispered conversations, and shared secrets. While Layla remained oblivious to what was happening, William and his stepdaughter were slowly building a future together, one that had no room for Layla. And the only way William could make that future a reality was to eliminate the one obstacle standing in his way. With each passing day, William's plan grew more concrete. The hospital visits, the unexplained symptoms, and the spiked drinks were all part of his carefully laid out scheme. Layla's health began to fail. She grew weaker with each passing day, unable to understand what was happening to her. And William, the man she trusted, stood by her side, playing the concerned husband while secretly orchestrating her downfall. The betrayal in this story isn't just in the affair. It's in the careful manipulation of emotions, the twisting of trust, and the calculated removal of obstacles. By the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late. The pieces had been set in motion long before anyone realized what was happening. And by the time Layla understood the full extent of the betrayal, there was no going back. Every story of betrayal has a beginning, a moment when boundaries are crossed and intentions shift into something dangerous. For William Hudson, that moment was subtle, almost imperceptible. What started as ordinary interactions with his 24-year-old stepdaughter slowly evolved into something neither of them should have allowed. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Conversations that lasted just a little too long. Gestures of support that felt comforting, perhaps even necessary. But somewhere along the way, those small moments began to carry a weight neither could ignore. William's obsession didn't happen overnight. Living under the same roof, he began to see his stepdaughter not just as a young woman needing guidance, but as someone who could fill the emotional void left by his deteriorating marriage with Layla. In his mind, the lines blurred. Fatherly concern gave way to something possessive, something selfish. It started with words spoken carefully but deliberately. "Your mother doesn't understand me the way you do," Williams might have whispered, his words heavy with suggestion. "She's always angry these days. You're different." These words may have sounded like confessions of frustration, but beneath them lay a dangerous manipulation, an attempt to create a bond with the stepdaughter that went beyond what was appropriate. Slowly but surely, William planted seeds of doubt about Layla in his stepdaughter's mind, creating an emotional wedge between mother and daughter. And once the distance between them grew, William took the next step. Their interactions became increasingly private. Conversations that only took place behind closed doors, text messages exchanged at odd hours, and unexplained absences that neither could easily account for. William's stepdaughter, feeling seen and understood in ways she hadn't before, began to confide in him more and more. Whether she was fully aware of the dangerous path they were on is unclear, but it was clear that she was falling under his influence. The connection they shared wasn't just about companionship. It was the start of something far more damaging. To those on the outside, the stepdaughter's behavior might have seemed ordinary at first, but little signs of change began to emerge. She started spending more time with William, finding reasons to be alone with him when her mother wasn't around. She became secretive, her phone always within reach, her conversations vague and evasive. Text messages between her and William grew in frequency, hidden behind the guise of family coordination, but laced with meanings only they understood. It's hard to say whether the stepdaughter fully realized the betrayal she was becoming part of. Was she drawn into the relationship by his carefully placed words and gestures? Or did she willingly cross the line, knowing what it would mean for her mother? The truth may never be fully known. What's clear, however, is that William's plan was taking shape, and in his mind, there was no turning back. Once the affair was in motion, William Hudson knew that if he wanted a future with his stepdaughter, his wife, Layla, had to be removed. But not in an obvious way. Divorce wasn't enough. It would raise too many questions, trigger too much scrutiny. For William, the solution had to be subtle, gradual, something that would go unnoticed until it was too late. That's when he devised his plan. If this one hit you like it hit me, don't scroll past. Subscribe now, share it, and help keep their story alive. They deserve that much. Poison. It began with her favorite drink, Coca-Cola, a glass here, a bottle there, each laced with substances that would slowly chip away at her health. William started small, spiking Layla's soda with MDMA, a party drug known to create confusion and physical distress. When that wasn't enough to incapacitate her, he escalated his efforts, adding cocaine into the mix. To anyone looking in from the outside, her health issues seemed random, a mystery with no clear cause. But to William, every dose brought him one step closer to his goal. It didn't take long for Layla to start feeling the effects. Headaches, dizziness, rapid heartbeats, symptoms that came without warning and left her gasping for relief. Her first trip to the hospital seemed like an isolated event. The doctors attributed it to stress, dehydration, or perhaps exhaustion. She was treated and sent home, unaware that the person waiting at her bedside was the very reason for her suffering. But the symptoms returned, and with each episode, they grew more severe. Another trip to the emergency room, and then another. And yet, every time she was discharged, the diagnosis remained elusive. Tests came back inconclusive. There was no explanation for her racing heart, no reason for the sudden episodes of confusion and fainting. The doctors, frustrated, tried different treatments, but nothing seemed to help. And as Layla's condition worsened, so did the mystery. Doctors couldn't understand why her health kept deteriorating. As the hospital visits became more frequent, family and friends started to take notice. Why was Layla always sick? Why did it seem like every time she began to recover, another episode would strike out of nowhere? At first, they chalked it up to bad luck. Maybe she was going through a particularly rough season with her health. But soon, questions began to surface. Some noticed that her symptoms seemed to flare up after social gatherings, especially those where William had been the one preparing her drinks. Others found it strange how attentive he seemed. Too attentive, almost as if he was overcompensating. In public, William played the concerned husband flawlessly, always hovering by Layla's side, insisting on handling her medications, making sure she had everything she needed. But behind closed doors, his intentions were far from noble. Every hospital visit, every close call, was just another part of his carefully laid plan to eliminate Layla without raising suspicion. It was a delicate game William was playing, keeping Layla just sick enough to incapacitate her, but not so sick that her death would attract unwanted attention. Each time she came back from the hospital, weakened but alive, William adjusted his strategy, increasing the dosage just slightly, hoping that the next time would be the last. And all the while, he kept up appearances, reassuring worried family members that everything would be fine, that Layla just needed rest. But beneath his calm exterior, William knew the clock was ticking. Every failed attempt brought the risk of exposure. Every lingering question from friends or doctors was a threat to his plan. And yet, William pressed on, convinced that he could outlast the suspicions, outmaneuver the questions, and finally rid himself of the one obstacle standing between him and the life he wanted. One evening, as William handed her a fresh glass of Coca-Cola, Layla hesitated. The glass sat in front of her, cold and untouched. For a moment, she studied her husband's face, searching for something, anything that would explain the growing knot of fear in her stomach. "Did you put something in my drink?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the silence. William didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, a picture of innocence. He chuckled, brushing off her question as if it were nothing more than a bad joke. "You're being paranoid," he said, placing his hand on hers reassuringly. And just like that, the moment passed. At least, that's what William thought. But for Layla, the question lingered, gnawing at her long after she took the first reluctant sip. There were close calls, moments when William's scheme teetered on the edge of exposure. Once, during a visit from a close friend, Layla mentioned how strange her health had been lately. The friend, concerned, suggested that maybe it wasn't stress after all and urged her to see a different doctor. William's jaw tightened at the suggestion, but he smiled politely and quickly steered the conversation in another direction, diffusing the situation before it could spiral. Another time, Layla's sister dropped by unexpectedly and found William standing over Layla, coaxing her to finish her drink despite her obvious reluctance. The sister raised an eyebrow but said nothing, though the moment didn't escape her notice. William could feel the questions forming in her mind, threatening to unravel his carefully constructed lie. But with his usual charm, he smoothed things over, laughing it off as concern for his wife's dehydration. The sister left, uneasy but unsure of what she had seen, while William exhaled, knowing how close he had come to slipping. The more resilient Layla became, the more frustrated William grew. No matter how carefully he dosed her drinks, she kept bouncing back, slower each time, but always just enough to make him start over. Each recovery was a slap in the face, a reminder that his plan wasn't for William. It gnawed at him, the thought that despite everything, Layla was still standing. And every hospital discharge felt like a delay he couldn't afford. William's desperation began to show in small but telling ways. His patience wore thin. Conversations became tense, his temper flaring at the slightest inconvenience. The mask of concern he had worn so well in public began to crack behind closed doors. The longer Layla survived, the more the stepdaughter's questions started to creep in too. When will it be over? When will we finally be together? And William, feeling the pressure from both sides, knew he had to act faster, more decisively. He started increasing the doses, carefully calculating how much more Layla's body could take without killing her outright. Every time she faltered, every stumble, every slurred word, William felt closer to the life he had imagined with his stepdaughter. But each recovery pushed him further into frustration, feeding the growing fear that he might never succeed. His plan was hanging by a thread, and with every day that Layla survived, the noose tightened around his own neck. It was no longer just a game of patience. Time was running out, and William knew it. The questions from friends and family were becoming harder to dodge. Layla's own suspicions were sharpening, and the stepdaughter's impatience was threatening to expose everything. William needed to make a final move, one that would end everything once and for all. But the question was, would he get away with it, or had the cracks in his plan already begun to show? One nurse, familiar with cases of substance abuse, noticed traces of drugs that didn't belong, MDMA and cocaine. They were substances that didn't fit with Layla's lifestyle, a woman who had never been known to use recreational drugs. With each visit, these substances showed up again and again, raising red flags. It didn't take long before the hospital notified law enforcement. What started as a medical mystery was now becoming a criminal investigation. Detectives arrived quietly, piecing together the strange circumstances of Layla's repeated hospital visits. They interviewed family members, neighbors, and anyone who had seen her before the incidents. When they spoke with William, he played his part convincingly, expressing concern for his wife's well-being. He described her symptoms in meticulous detail, carefully omitting the fact that he had caused them. But detectives were already suspicious. Why did a man who claimed to be so worried fail to mention the strange drugs found in his wife's system? Surveillance was discreetly put in place. Investigators began tracking William's movements, watching his interactions with family and medical staff. Meanwhile, they gathered medical records and subpoena text messages, looking for anything that could tie him to the substances found in Layla's body. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they needed one last break, something definitive that would expose William's true intentions. It came when detectives gained access to William's phone. Among the seemingly innocent conversations, they uncovered a series of encrypted messages between William and his stepdaughter. The texts revealed more than just an inappropriate relationship. They outlined a carefully constructed plan to incapacitate Layla. The stepdaughter's impatience was evident, with messages urging William to finish the job so they could finally be together. What they discovered in William's phone would blow the case wide open. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces fit together: the affair, the poisoning, the meticulous planning. Detectives now had evidence linking William directly to the scheme, but the investigation didn't stop there. They needed to understand just how deeply the stepdaughter was involved. When questioned, the stepdaughter initially denied any involvement. But as detectives confronted her with the messages, her resolve began to crack. Faced with the undeniable evidence of her complicity, she broke down and confessed, a stunning revelation that added a new layer of betrayal to an already shocking case. She admitted that she had known about the poisoning all along. Not only had she been aware, but she had also actively encouraged William to carry out the plan. In their private conversations, they fantasized about a life together without Layla. No more sneaking around, no more secrets. Their whispered promises of a future built on deception had pushed them both to cross every moral line. "Just make it happen," she had texted William late one night, imagining a life without her mother standing in the way. That message, detectives realized, wasn't just frustration. It was intent. It was a part of the plot, making the stepdaughter as much a part of the crime as William himself. The investigation had laid everything bare. Text messages, hospital records, and confessions that exposed a betrayal so profound it left investigators stunned. What began as a medical mystery had become a case of manipulation, obsession, and murder in the making. But there was one question left. Would William's carefully laid plan collapse under the weight of the evidence? Or had he still managed to cover his tracks well enough to escape justice? When police confronted Alfred William with the overwhelming evidence, the toxicology reports, phone messages, and his stepdaughter's confession, his facade finally cracked. Sitting under the harsh glare of the interrogation room lights, William's voice was low and steady as he began to speak. What followed was a chilling confession, revealing not just his actions but the twisted reasoning behind them. I wanted to marry her, William said bluntly, referring to his 24-year-old stepdaughter. She needed me and I needed her. He spoke without remorse, detailing how he poisoned his wife, Layla, over time, hoping to incapacitate her just enough to remove her from the picture. His intention wasn't immediate death, but gradual removal so he could transition seamlessly into a relationship with her daughter. It wasn't just about love, if it could even be called that. To William, it was control, a desperate attempt to reshape his life into the fantasy he had envisioned. The detectives listened in stunned silence. Was this love, or was it obsession? The line was thin, blurred by manipulation and betrayal. William insisted that his relationship with the stepdaughter was genuine, that it was mutual. But his words revealed more than just an emotional entanglement. They exposed a toxic need for dominance masked as affection. The courtroom was tense, filled with family members, reporters, and curious spectators. On one side sat Layla, visibly frail but determined to see justice served. On the other sat William, cold and expressionless, the weight of his crimes resting heavily on the room. The prosecutors wasted no time presenting the evidence methodically. The toxicology reports, the stepdaughter's messages, William's confession. Each piece painted a clear picture of premeditated betrayal, leaving little room for doubt. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom. What would drive a man to betray his family in such a horrifying way? They described the calculated poisoning, the manipulation of the stepdaughter, and the deliberate attempt to erase Layla from his life. Also, William could pursue a relationship that defied every moral boundary. William's defense attorney tried to shift the narrative, arguing for leniency by pointing to his advanced age and lack of prior criminal record. The attorney painted him as a misguided old man who had made tragic mistakes out of emotional confusion rather than a dangerous predator. But the prosecutor pushed back hard, reminding the court of the calculated nature of his actions, how he poisoned his wife over months and plotted with the stepdaughter for a future together. Then came the emotional testimonies. Layla spoke first, her voice shaking but unwavering as she described the betrayal that had shattered her family. I trusted him. I let him into my home, my life, and he used the trust to destroy everything. The weight of her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the emotional damage William had caused. The trial reached its conclusion, and the courtroom held its collective breath as the judge delivered the sentence: 4 years in prison followed by 5 years of probation for aggravated battery posing a risk of death. A murmur spread through the courtroom, some in disbelief, others in quiet anger. For a crime so deliberate, so heartless, 4 years felt like a slap on the wrist. Layla sat quietly, her expression unreadable as the judge explained that the sentence reflected the nature of the charge, not the emotional betrayal at its core. But the question lingered in the minds of everyone present. To Layla, the answer was clear. Justice had fallen short. William, the man who had poisoned her and shattered her family, would be out of prison in a matter of years. And with each day that passed, there was the unsettling possibility that the stepdaughter, still emotionally entangled with him, might welcome him back into her life. William left the courtroom in silence, escorted by officers. His stepdaughter, though not formally charged, was left to face the consequences of her involvement. Alienated from family, haunted by the weight of her decisions. Layla, though free from William's grasp, was left with the emotional scars of betrayal that no sentence could ever erase. The crime left scars that went far beyond the courtroom. The betrayal didn't just destroy William's relationship with Layla, it tore apart the entire family. After William's conviction, the stepdaughter faced a future that was as uncertain as it was lonely. Friends and family distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her actions. Though she wasn't formally charged with a crime, her involvement in the plot left her isolated and deeply scarred. Some believed she had been manipulated. Others saw her as just as guilty as William. But regardless of public opinion, she now had to live with the consequences of her choices. Though Layla's health slowly began to improve once the poisoning stopped, the emotional damage ran deep. The recovery was bittersweet. Every small victory in her health was overshadowed by the knowledge of what had been done to her. Family gatherings became rare, conversations stilted and awkward. The sense of trust and unity they once shared was gone, replaced by silence and unresolved resentment. William's sentence, 4 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, left many feeling that justice had not been fully served. Yet the looming question remained: what would happen when William walked free? Would he try to rekindle the relationship with the stepdaughter, despite everything that had happened? Or would he disappear quietly, hoping to escape the weight of his actions? With William's release date approaching, Layla found herself gripped by fear once again. Though the court's judgment had been made, the emotional battle was far from over. The thought of William returning to her stepdaughter's life was enough to keep her awake at night. Even after everything, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't try to reclaim what he believed was his. This case leaves us with difficult questions, ones that linger long after the courtroom doors have closed. Can love ever justify betrayal? And if you were in Layla's shoes, would you ever be able to forgive? These questions invite reflection on the blurred lines between affection and manipulation, love and control. As the story ends, one final question lingers. Is this truly the end of William's story, or just the beginning of another chapter? Will he find a way back into the stepdaughter's life? Will the family ever find closure? Or will the consequences of this betrayal continue to ripple for years to come? Stay tuned, because next time we explore another real-life case where love turned deadly. This one is even more shocking than the last. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another twisted story. What do you think?